supply.
Didn't Mexico decriminalize a lot of drugs like fairly recently?
Yeah, so they had a big Supreme Court decision. I spent a lot of time in Mexico, and I think about this time I spent in Mexico really often, because it was. I mean, I've been to a lot of bad places. I covered the war in the Congo. I've been to Iraq. I've been to Gaza. I've never seen anything like what happened in Juarez when I was there. And I think it's worth explaining. So when you, like I was saying, when you ban drugs, they don't disappear, right? They're transferred to armed criminal gangs. If you live in a housing project in the United States where 5% of the economy of that housing project is in the hands of armed criminal gangs, that's going to be a shitty, frightening place to be, right? A place like Ciudad Juarez, which is on the border with Mexican side of the United States border with, it's the other side with El Paso. By the time I went there, it was 70% of the economy was in the hands of these armed criminal gangs, right? So I remember going to see this guy, Rosalio Reta. I interviewed people about him in Juarez, but then he's in prison in the United States, he's in Tyler County. And Rosalio is an interesting guy. So he butchered or beheaded about 70 people between the ages of 13 and 17. I remember going into the prison actually to see him, and the guard said to me on the way in, well, obviously I can't leave you alone with him because he's like butchered all these people. I was like, oh, great, thanks. And I remember about 5 minutes in, turned around, the guard was fucking gone. But I was sitting with Rosalio, talking about his life and his story. So Rosalio grew up in Laredo. It's on the Texas side of the border. It's basically the same place as Nuevo Laredo on the Mexican side. It was very easy to cross the border at that time. So he was growing up in the late 90s, noughties. I mean, Rosalio was 13. So the Zetas were a kind of famous drug gang at that time. They still are. Drug cartel. How the Zetas were created is an insane story every taxpayer should know. The US government decided to train an elite anti-drug force for the Mexican government, right? Like kind of Navy SEALs for the anti-drug force. They take them to Fort Bragg. They spent something like $250 million training them up. They go back to Mexico. 6 months later, they all defected en masse, almost all of them, and created a drug cartel, the Zetas. Great use of your tax money. So the Zetas were this kind of glamorous, in inverted commas, drug gang, right, operating on that part of the border. Drug routes move around according to where they put policing. It always gets through, but it moves around. They call it the balloon effect. Imagine a balloon half full of air. You push down one pace, the air comes up somewhere else. But at that time, it was going through Juarez and El Paso and Laredo and Nuevo Laredo. And Rosalio... So there's two stories about how Rosalio gets involved with the Zetas. What Rosalio says is he was basically kidnapped by them and forced to start killing people. I don't think that's true. If you look at the evidence, it's that he sort of volunteered, but he's 13, so I don't hold him morally responsible for that. But either way, there's one night, it all begins. He's taken on the Mexican side of the border to a warehouse where they are torturing people, burning them alive. He's given a gun by a guy called Miguel Trevino, who later became the head of the Zetas. And he's told to shoot someone in the head, and that's the moment you're in. And when you're in with the Zetas, you never get out, right? No one leaves. No one leaves alive. And so they begin to train him. He's sent to in 2005, he's sent to a summer camp that's literally a camp that teaches you how to behead people and do all sorts of things. And he's then sent, him and his friends are then sent to murder people. With his friends Jesse and Gabriel, they murder huge numbers of people. That they were called within the Zetas call these child soldiers the Expendables, because they don't give a shit if they live or die, right? They, as one person said to me, they prefer children because they don't understand death so well, right? Obviously, as Rosalio got a bit older, he understood death better. All his friends get murdered. Eventually, he tries to get back to the US. He cooperates. He now lives in solitary confinement where he will live for the rest of his life, because when they let him out of solitary, shortly before I met him, he was immediately stabbed in the neck. And again, you think about this insane violence that we created, right? When I went to Juarez, it's this bizarre thing. So at that time, you were told it wasn't, quite rightly, it wasn't safe to stay in Juarez overnight. So I would stay overnight in El Paso and I'd walk across the bridge, right? Through obviously you have to show a passport. I remember the customs people going, why the fuck are you going into Juarez? But going there, and it's weird, on the other side of the bridge, there's this sign, and it says, welcome to historic downtown Juarez. And it used to be a tourist site. Billie Holiday got married there. But now it's just, at that time, it was just covered with images of missing women. Just everywhere, because this is another really important part of what this violence does. And I think it's really important we understand this is the violence caused by the system that we uphold and we imposed on Mexico. Mexicans do not want this, right? So there's another story. I think this was, of all the stories I wrote about for Chasing the Scream, along with one other one I can tell you about if you want, this was the hardest. So a woman in Juarez, when the drug war violence starts to go through, called Marisela Escobedo. She was a nurse, but Marisela was incredibly hardworking, so she also would do these, what do you call them, like wood carvings, basically, and she would sell them in the market on Saturdays and Sundays. She had 3 kids. Her youngest daughter was called Ruby. She was 14 at the time, and they would work on this stall in the marketplace every Saturday. I think maybe even Sundays as well, some Sundays. And one day, a guy comes up to Marisela at her stall called Sergio, who was a young guy. He was like 21. And he's just had a baby, he needs a job. Marisela was kind of soft-hearted. She gives him a job working on her market stall. And a few months later, she discovers to her horror that he's having sex with her 14-year-old daughter, Ruby. And she's like, fires him immediately and goes to the police and says, you need to go and question him, right? He's 21, she's 14, this is a crime. Police don't do anything. She doesn't understand it. Why are they not investigating this? Her daughter starts running away to be with Sergio. Marisela keeps going to get her back. She keeps going to the police saying, this is a crime. He can't live with a 14-year-old. Go and arrest him. They won't do anything. Right? She's completely puzzled by this. Then Ruby gets pregnant. Marisela's like, she's 15 by then. She's like, fuck, I've got to keep her in my life. So she keeps going to see Ruby. By this time, she's kind of accepted the police with real rage that the police aren't going to do anything. And then one day, just after the baby was born, she goes to see Ruby. And Sergio's there with the baby. And he says, oh, Ruby has run away with another man. She's gone. She's not coming back. And Marisela's like, what, and left her baby? No, she hasn't done that. I know she hasn't done that. I know my daughter. He's like, well, she's gone. So Marisela waits. Christmas comes, no message. New Year comes, no message. She starts to go to the neighborhood and hand out leaflets with pictures of her daughter. Loads of women are going missing in Juarez at this time. I'll tell you why in a minute. Just saying, have you seen this girl? And after a few days, she gets a call from a kid called Angel, who says, I'm really frightened to tell you something. If you drive me out into the desert, I'll tell you. So she drives Angel out into the desert. I think he was 14. And he says, Sergio murdered your daughter and he made me help him dispose of the body. And he told Marisela where the body was. It was actually a place where they dumped pig carcasses from the abattoir. So she goes and she finds the body with her son. And she goes to the police, and the police finally do something and they arrest Sergio. Sergio's put on trial. In the witness box, he breaks down, admits he did it, and apologises to Marisela. And then a few weeks later, he's acquitted of all charges and disappears. And Marisela's like, what the fuck is going on here? So she starts to look into this, and she discovers, and this is where it intersects with the drug war in a really important way, that Sergio was a member of the Zetas, right? Now, if you're a member of the Zetas, at that time in Juarez, it's different now because another drug gang has displaced them, you own the state, right? You have, if they control 70% of the economy, you have more money than the government, right? So the police worked for them when I went to go interview Rosalio. He said, when I would go and murder people, the police would come with me. They would dispose of the body, right? I remember...
Jesus Christ. And what year are we talking about?
This is like 6 years ago. I remember I remember it's interesting because one of the things when you're in a dangerous place, when you're in a dangerous place, one of the things you do is you read danger from how frightened the people around you are, yes. Right? Because you don't know the place. I was there with Julian Cardona, who was my fixer, who's he's the Reuters correspondent. Juarez, one of the bravest people I've ever met. But it was realizing how frightened other people were for me and Julian, right? And I remember after I'd been there for a few days, Julian kept introducing me. By that time, the killings were basically all being done by the police. And I was saying, Julian, this is important that I meet people who've been killed by the police, but I should also meet people who've been killed by the cartels more recently. And he said, he just laughed and said, no, that's not how it works, Johann. Now, if the cartels want to kill someone, they just pay the police to do it, right? So it's this real realization. All right, if someone comes for you, there is nowhere for you to go, right? So Marisela refuses to accept that she lives in a country where there is no justice. She decides, okay, they're not going to solve this. I'm going to solve this. She appealed. Loads of women are missing because it turns out if a bunch of criminals control the state, they will just murder loads of women and get away with it, right? There are some men who just want to murder women, and if they give them license to do it, they'll do it. That's why so many women were missing. Marisela gathers a load of those mothers. She says some of them don't know where their daughters are, some of them know their daughters are dead. She's like, I need your help. We're going to find this guy who's done this, right? So Marisela turns herself with these women into a detective. She starts tracking Sergio all over Mexico, wherever there are sightings. She walks everywhere. She walks over 1,000 miles, right? She walks through the desert. It becomes a media phenomenon. People follow her. She's like this symbol of the loss that's happened in Mexico. And incredibly, with her friend Berta Alicia Garcia, who I got to know later, after 2 years, she finds Sergio. She tracks him down. She goes to the police. She tells them where he is. They tip him off and he disappears. And she's devastated. So she decides she's going to go to the governor's mansion in Chihuahua, which is the state capital. She goes there and she sets up tent outside the governor's mansion. And she's like, I'm not leaving here until you people go and find this man. And she calls on every mother who has a daughter who's missing or who they're afraid of to come and join her in this fight, right? And it gets to Christmas Eve and she's preparing to, just before Christmas, she says on Christmas Eve, I'm going to have this big Christmas dinner here, people can join me. She gives this great speech and a man walks up to her and shoots her in the head in front of all the police, everyone.